Right, thank you very much, Iwata-san. What I'm going to talk about is nuclear discourse after the TEPCO accident. First of all, I have to apologize. The first thing is that the English slide and Japanese slide don't match to some extent. Well, there's a little bit of discrepancy between English slides and Japanese slide. And for those people who are listening to my talk and watching my talk in Japanese slide, please be careful. And I'm sorry about that for interpreters. And another thing is that what I'm talking about is nothing new. In fact, I've talked about it here and there, but the situation still continues. So I still think that it's valid. Okay. And in fact, what I'm going to talk about is rather complementary to what Mako-san has just talked about. She delved deeper into what's going on actually in the process of policy making, in the process of risk communication and all these things. But I take distance. I take distance and just observe the disclosure structure en masse, right? And this is the content of my talk. First of all, I'm going to just talk about the boom of risk communication and confirm what is the basic nature of the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear plant disaster. And after that, talk a little bit about the language and laws as social reality. And these three constitute the background. And after that, I get into the post-accidental discourse and analyzing that to some extent in order to clarify why the current situation prevails, and also the wider effect of the disclosure structure. Right. So let me start from the first thing. At the beginning of this fiscal year, we heard the news. 11 ministries and agencies requested several billion yen for risk communication. And this year, we are observing many risk communication projects, including government advertisement in newspapers and pamphlets, perhaps. And logic behind this risk communication can be postulated like this. You know, Professor Dr. Nagataki once said, why do ordinary citizens demand zero risk in radiation-related matters? And behind that question lies the assumption that low-level radiation does not cause immediate harm. There are many other risks. Then why do people demand zero risk in the case of radiation, specifically in the case of radiation? Well, perhaps these people are ignorant. And therefore, we need proper and effective risk communication. And we are back to the boom of risk communication. But before getting into analyzing the structure behind the risk communication, let us confirm what exactly was TEPCO Fukushima Daiichi nuclear plant disaster. Back in 1986, immediately after the Chernobyl nuclear accident, we had this stated by an official. In Japanese nuclear plant, I had a hydrogen explosion will not occur. Radioactive materials will not be released into the environment. That's what is stated, was explicitly stated by an official in charge of the commercial nuclear plant. And also, up until very recently, the Ministry of Education distributed a pamphlet to junior high school students in which they state these safety measures have a margin that is more sufficient than what can be expected, right? But in 2011, the hydrogen explosion occurred, and a large amount of radioactive materials was released to the environment, right? And the National Diet Independent Investigation Commission released a report in which it states, as for the nature of the nuclear accident or the background of the nuclear disaster, that, and it says this, they either intentionally postponed putting safety measures in place or made decisions based on their organization's self-interest and not in the interest of public safety. And the NAIC report also states this: the government, the regulators, and TEPCO effectively betray the nation's right to be safe from nuclear accident. And what is right to be safe? We have the common level of reference, which is in Japanese constitution, which states in Article 25, all people shall have the right to maintain the minimum standards of wholesome and cultured living. And in all spheres of life, what is more important is that the state shall use its endeavors for the promotion and extension of social welfare and security and of public health, right? And slightly further than that, so from the point of view of that kind of rights, right, a legal scholar stated that the damage is not whether you get the health effect or not, but damage of that they are forced to choose one or the other is already a common damage inflicted on people. So, in a nutshell, the TEPCO nuclear plant disaster, which was caused by the negligence of the government, regulatory bodies, and TEPCO, 1, violated citizens' right to be safe, and 2, unfortunately, rights are still being violated, as can be manifested by the fact that a large number of people are still unable to return home, and still people are forced to choose without much support. So these are violations of human rights inflicted on people by the government, regulators, and TEPCO, right? So let us go back to the logic behind risk communication, which starts from the question that why do ordinary citizens demand zero risks, right? It's a red herring, as it is not addressed within the framework of the right violations, which is a proper postulation and characterization of the nuclear disaster. So, against this backdrop, I guess the proper question to be addressed is this. How have these misguided discussions unduly come to prevail, right? So this is the topic to which we now turn. But before getting into analyzing the background arrangement of discourse which enables this kind of question to prevail, let me confirm a little bit about the nature of language and laws as social reality. Which means that language in general is binding. And to the same extent, laws are binding as well. And not because their violations lead to punishment, but because they are binding. I'm sorry about that. And more importantly, individual utterances and legal tokens make sense, personally and socially, on the basis of this deontic nature of language and laws. Right. But precisely because language, laws, and probably money and other things constitute a social reality, but not the natural reality, there's a fragile aspect in it. It's a fragile existence because massive misuse of language and utterances can destroy the linguistic, legal, and social infrastructure and can introduce unhealthy relationship among actors, conceive the real issues to be addressed, and relativize truth in the flood of lies and nonsense, right? So up to here, I've finished explaining the background before getting into the analysis of the arrangement of disclosure structure. First, we confirmed that we are observing a boom in risk communication, and just confirmed and checked the nature of the accident, upon which we just raised a suspicion to the situation of risk communication. And as a side kind of topic, I just introduced the status of language and laws. Now, what remains to be addressed is the post-accidental discourse. That is the main content, but that discourse does not only affect the nuclear discourse as such, but has a wider socio-political effect, to which I also turn. Anyway, and after that, in the end, we will go back to the risk communication. Right? So the post-accident discourse, unduly appropriated. Well, putting the conclusions first, we are observing three main issues related to the post-accidental discourse. It has established an arrangement of communication in which perpetrators give opinion to victims, and in which those who are responsible have restricted the disclosure agenda to radiation, which has effectively downplayed the social and rights issues. And the third and last, within which so-called radiation experts has provided a plethora of scientifically unfounded claims, mostly downplaying the risk of radiation. Right. So let's check the first issue. This is what we saw, what the Prime Minister's office released on 20th of March 2011 to the residents in Kanto and Tohoku area. Rain will cause no health effects. Rain will cause no health effects, be reassured. Okay, that's what we had. Of course, government has a responsibility to take care of people's, citizens' health and other things. So to that extent, it's not violating their role anyway. But after that, we have observed massive bombardment of similar calls by government and experts to people. Like no problem, no immediate health effects, smoking is more dangerous, you cannot assure zero risks anyway, stress is more hazardous. And on and on. But who are these people who told us that stress is more hazardous, there's no risks, nothing to worry about? These people are, according to NIC report, the government, the regulators, and TEPCO, who have effectively betrayed the nation's right to be safe from nuclear accidents, right? So exactly these people, the same people have been talking to us that it's safe. Okay. So, but unfortunately, they are the ones who talked, who spoke up. So those who are responsible for the accident secure the position to impose their opinions on victims. So this is a basic background structure, which was an arrangement of discourse that they defined, unfortunately, which in a nutshell, perpetrators make decisions and they decide things on victims' behalf. Something's wrong with that. And the second aspect of the post-accident discourse is that the topic agenda is narrowly restricted to the issues of radiation, right? The government, media, and experts have been talking about the issues of potential health risks of radiation as if this is the single most important issue. Mostly, this assumption, underlying assumption is unstated. They just keep talking about health risks, well, at the same time downplaying the health risks, but some honest and naive people explicitly stated. And here comes a professor of philosophy called Dr. Professor Masaki Ichinose. And he stated in the year of 2011, he stated this: chronic exposure to low-dose radiation will cause death by cancer. The largest issue, the largest cause of worry for us, which hangs like a black cloud above us, is no more and no less this proposition. And he also went on to say this, but why are people worried about this, while no physical harm has yet to become apparent, right? Recall the nature of the TEPCO accident. According to the NIC report, the government, the regulators, and TEPCO effectively betrayed the nation's right to be safe from nuclear accidents. That's the first thing, and it's not only the health issues, but the very fact that they're forced to choose one or the other, whether they stay or they move, all the other choices, is a common damage inflicted on people by the accident. And going back to Professor Ichinose's statement, suppose that somebody splashed water on you in the street and you get angry and worried. And here comes the professor of philosophy with a serious expressions, but probably no serious thought or no thought whatsoever for that matter, and said, but why are you worried about this when no physical harm is yet to become apparent? Do we not call this, have we not called this, is the modernity taught us to say that this is sort of the second harassment, But these things prevail going on and on. And in addition to that, where the discourse on health effects is duly misleading. First of all, I've already talked about it. The health issue was detached from the wider context of human rights violations inflicted on people by the negligence of the government and TEPCO. That's the first thing. The second thing is definition of health was trivialized by restricting it to physical damage. And this is not my opinion. This is actually not my opinion. This is what we should be talking about because the WHO states, and this statement is legally binding in Japan because Japan ratified WHO statute in 1951. First of all, WHO states that good health is a state of complete physical, social, and mental well-being, and not merely the absence of disease or infirmity, right? So that is the first point. And in addition to that, if you look at the WHO website, it clearly says that health is a fundamental human right, recognized in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. So what I've talked about has nothing to do with my personal opinion. I just refer to the some sort of regulation, legally binding statement, and deduce the argument from that. Right? The third point of the post-accidental discourse is that after that, first, the people who are responsible for the accident secure the position to talk, one. Two, they restricted the disclosure agenda to the narrow sense of health. Then within that discussion, so-called radiation expert has provided a plethora of scientifically unfounded claims, mostly downplaying the risk of radiation. And we are going back to what I've already introduced, a massive bombardment of scientifically unfounded and often, too often, just outright false claims like this. Sea fish do not concentrate radioactive iodine because they retain iodine in their body. That's stated by Professor Dr. Keiichi Nakagawa of the University of Tokyo Hospital. But immediately after that, the baby lungfishes are found to contain a huge amount of radioactive iodine. And non-negative health effects occur below 100 millisievert, which is now well refuted. So, all in all, the post-accidental discourse has established this sort of arrangement. The first of all, those who are responsible kept the position to talk to people, make decisions pretending that they are on the people's behalf. People who raise voice against this has become marked, right? And lead to the suppression of the legal framework agreed by the society. And discussions were unduly restricted to radiation, with the misguided definition of health, with the effect of concealing the issues of human rights and right-related issues, and within the discussion, or within the discourse of health effects, overriding scientific knowledge by political terms. Right? That's what happened. And projections is that, well, within this kind of disclosure arrangement, it is most probably the case that responsibilities remain unaddressed and problem personalized. Right. And this disclosure arrangement has wider effect, in fact, than what is immediately concerned with, which is the topics related to nuclear disaster. First of all, we observed this. In May 3rd, 2011, Professor Shunichi Yamashita stated in his talk like this: what is at stake here in Fukushima now is to what extent we can keep this 1 millisievert restriction, referring to the ordinary people's restriction of the dose, right? Annual dose. And in last year, at the beginning of, no, could be not June, but January, but I'm sorry about that, Professor Emeritus Otsura stated, it is a matter of course that laws in ordinary situations do not hold in an emergency situations, both of which are not really true. To change laws and regulations without due process because they are violated is not legally valid. You know, if gangsters start fighting each other, and a lot of gangsters started owning guns, and the prohibition of the owning guns are violated. And then if the lawmaker says that let's change the law so that people can have guns, which is not the way. Anyway. And we have, in relation to these issues, the existing guiding principles, like the GH Miami Declaration, 15 years ago, we affirmed the prevention of exposure is the single most effective means of protecting children against environmental threats. And also, the basic environment plan which is regulatory binding. And the fourth law, basic environmental plan, was reaffirmed just this year, which states a lack of scientific knowledge does not justify delay in implementing due measures. We should implement preventive measures while at the same time endeavoring to enhance our scientific knowledge, right? So this is not what I said. This is what the government and ministries say, right? And we have to confirm here that language, laws and regulations, preventive policies, limit of additional laws, potential dose over certain amount in control areas, whatever so-called experts say the government says, these policies and regulations are still binding. They are still binding, you know. But unfortunately, because language and laws are not the natural reality, but they are social reality, the collective erosion of these leads us to somewhere weird. Like due to the massive erosion of the deontic nature of language and laws, we now have unfounded claims prevail, semi-legal claims prevail, and outright right prevails, all serving as a basis of socio-political planning and decision-making, or perhaps lack thereof. And we are observing this factual nonsense, the declaration of back to normality following the nuclear accident, contaminated water is completely blocked, which Mako-san had already referred to. The situation is completely under control, both issued by Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. Right. So, in fact, taking advantage of the emergency situation we are observing now, that the deontic nature of language and laws are being eroded, right? So what happened? Summing up what happened? Responsibilities, well, let's forget them because we are in emergency. Laws and regulations, well, let's forget them as we are in an emergency. Science, forget it as we are experts and we are in an emergency. Right? Then here comes the end conclusion. Emergency, forget it. Because after ignoring responsibilities, laws and regulations and science, there's nothing to worry about. You know, there's absolutely nothing to worry about in this emergency situation. So retrospectively going back, we are observing responsible administrations on the basis of these semi-legal policies, and unscientific claims. And these are the examples of these. Back to normality, contaminated water is completely blocked. The situation is completely under control. It is a matter, of course, that laws in ordinary situations do not hold in an emergency situation. It's not a matter, of course, at all. And no negative health effects occur below 100 millisievert. It is not probable that current occurrence of thyroid cancer due to radiation exposure, and all these unfounded, unconfirmed claims. And some can talk like this. We can conclude that this nuclear accident kindly reminded us of the fact that we live a limited time of life full of risks. I sincerely hope that Japanese turn this order into something positive, which is stated by Professor Keiichi Nakagawa. But somehow, however, some worried and complaining people remain who perhaps fail to forget responsibilities, laws, and scientific opinions. Now, as these annoying issues exist no more because we've forgotten everything conveniently, the problem should be solved by making these complaining creatures recognize that we are living in a limited time of life full of risks. Thusly, the answer is communication and going back to what we are in now. Well, it's almost the end of my talk. Generally speaking, from the point of view of the deontic nature of language and laws as a social reality, in a desert which lacks the deontic nature of language and laws, a farrago of fantasies, trivial lies, and nonsense prevails. And it is accompanied by responsible administrations, have legal policies, and series of unscientific claims. And risk communication or travesty there plays an important role here to cover up these fantasies, irresponsibilities, and sublegalities and unscientificities. Right? Unfortunately, as Mako-san pointed out, many mainstream media at large colluded with this perhaps unconsciously, but sometimes consciously probably. And we are here now. I dare not say it is safe about the Sendai Genpatsu. It's Dr. Shuichi Tanaka. Then the Prime Minister Shinzo Abe stated that nuclear plants shall not be restarted unless 100% safety is guaranteed. And then the Minister of Economy, Trade and Industry, Yuichi Miyazawa, stated, after seeing blah, 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 it's going ahead, but 100% safety is not possible. And the governor of Kagoshima Prefecture says that they are now ready to restart the nuclear plant. Thank you very much for your attention.